And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Jake Hicks Show. We are continuing our candidate series, and today we have Alabama State Supreme Court candidate Ashleigh Dunham. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So we're going to jump right into the fray. And why don't you tell us a little about your background and what inspired you to run for the Supreme Court?
Oh, bless. Well, let me tell you, I'm what people call a recovering divorce attorney. So I did divorce litigation for years. Towards like the end of my career, I could tell I was getting really burned out. It's a really hard job. You're basically using people's own money against them. And, they're fighting for everything. They're fighting for their children. They're fighting for, um, it, just their retirements. They're fighting for just bills, bills to pay the bills every week. So I, did that for so many years. And then I became a fertility attorney because I went through 5 years of fertility treatment. And I did IVF in Alabama twice and got zero embryos. I got walked out of the back of the clinic. It was horrendous. It made you feel like your body was failing you. In my entire life, I have spent, if you do hard work and you do what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to get what you want. And that did not happen for me. So I actually had to leave my home state. I had to leave Alabama. I had to leave my family in the middle of a pandemic on Thanksgiving Day in 2020 in order to get a chance at having a family. And, I just feel that that changed everything for me. I now have a daughter. Her name is Aria, and she's amazing. But now the world that I'm raising her in, it's just so much, so differently. And when I saw the medical treatment that gave me my miracle, my little blessing, was taken away from everyone by the Supreme Court, I thought, these political agendas, we can't just rubber stamp political agendas anymore. We can't allow judges to use the court to make law. And I just have looked at the court and there's nobody on there who has done family law. So I've actually, I've had the privilege of hearing cases that touch on every corner of our communities, from small businesses to, child abuse and neglect. So I think that we need to make sure that our courts are fair and impartial. We're not making law, we're looking at the law and making sure that my daughter has a place that she can grow up in that is fair. So that's what made me run.
You know, that was such November of 2020 was such a dark time because it was the height of the pandemic. People were dying at extreme rates. And I just can't imagine one, you're trying to start a family, but the fear of getting on an airplane and traveling across the country, that just had to be a very,
Yes, absolutely. I had to do shots in the airport, on the plane. I had to go to the back of the plane to do the shots so that I could get enough eggs. So it was hard. And the only thing about that I could say, because I'm an optimistic person, I'm very optimistic. But the good thing is that I had a chance to recover emotionally from going through 5 years of fertility treatment and not being able to get a child. So I had the ability to, spend some time at home and kind of reflect on everything.
and not everyone is that fortunate, and you are very lucky in that. Alabama Supreme Court races are extremely expensive, and most voters are unaware of the importance of these races. What are you doing to make voters aware and understand the importance of this race?
So you're very, very right. These Supreme Court races, but because they're a statewide race, they're so expensive. And you just have to get the word out there to as many people as possible. So what I've been trying to do is, what I do every day is I sit on the bench and I hear these cases and I have to write my orders so that people can understand them because I'm not I'm not making decisions for the judges. I'm making decisions typically for the people. So for people who need to understand, what their custody case is doing, like when they're supposed to pick up their child, what they're supposed to pay. So I have to there's access to the courts. I have to make sure these people understand what is going on. So, the Alabama Supreme Court is the final word on all issues that impact families, whether it's their property, their health care, even custodial decisions. there are dependency cases, which is a lot of what I hear, where we have to determine whether or not, a child is dependent on the state of Alabama or not. So I try to use my social media and, use doing press releases and op-eds just to let people know like what's happening, what the court's decisions, what they mean for everyday people, you know, what it means if the legislature is passing something that is unconstitutional. I have to let people understand the impact of those things, because I think a big issue when it comes to voting is people not understanding how it impacts them. And that's a real big problem. Like there are a lot of people who are like, oh, that impacts a different person, that impacts my neighbor and I feel bad for them. But sometimes you don't get motivated until it really impacts your own life. And like for the IVF decision, it didn't impact me directly. I'd already had my miracle baby, but I knew what it was like to go through that. And so I saw all these families and I was like, I have to help them. So, it's hard, but I like to get out there on social media. I like to go around speaking. Anybody who invites me to speak, it's very rare that I turn it down unless I have a million things that month. I capped out in October. But that's just because I had so many people asking me to come talk to them, and it's very hard for me to say no. Not in my decisions, but when it comes to speaking. I love entertaining. I love talking to people. I love getting to know voters. And the thing is what people don't often know is that the judicial candidates, we cannot ask for campaign donations. But I've had really hardworking like host committee members and supporters who are sharing the messages and raising funds necessary to stay competitive. So it's, I think these people realize this isn't just about one candidate. It's not about me. It's about protecting fairness and integrity in our justice system. And they see that I can do that because of where I've litigated and what I've done in the past, because of my dedication to my legal career. And also, you have to have some common sense solutions when you're sitting on the bench. And I get to do that every single day.
I think that's also important that you talk about writing the opinions for the public, because you see some judges and some scholars who will write for the academic class and for the textbooks when you really need to be writing these orders for the people these rulings are going to affect in their day-to-day lives. That's so important. And it also makes the judiciary less scary for people, because often cases, most people don't have an interaction with the judiciary until a very dramatic time in their life.
You're right. I mean, what I handle are when people's children are taken from them. So they want to know what they can do to get their baby back, what they can do to find their way back to a family. And I fully believe that, as a court system, we should not be tearing families apart. We should be helping them get back together. So a lot of times when, we have a situation with drug use, we just need to get them treatment. So I really feel like we need to invest in futures and invest in our citizens and not just punish them. And, I'm seeing that happen a lot. And I think that Alabama needs to kind of go towards these accountability courts, which is great because the Chief Justice is doing that. And that's what I do for, every day is accountability courts and making sure that we are helping families.
Yeah, I like what you talk about, those accountability courts, those community corrections programs. Those are so helpful. I know someone who worked in community corrections, and she talks about how rewarding it was to see people turn their life around and succeed. Um, the Alabama Supreme Court infamously ruled that IVF was illegal in Alabama, and the legislature claims to have alleviated that issue. Please tell us why that claim really doesn't pass legal scrutiny.
Well, here's the thing. Our Supreme Court made law. They usurped the legislature and they said, listen, we have an agenda, and they rubber stamped that agenda. And it wasn't necessarily all of them. I know we had some good dissents, and actually some concurrences that sounded like dissents. That when you're looking at them, you're like, wait a minute, this sounds like a dissent. And so I don't feel like all of the justices were rubber stamping it. There were a few in particular that were trying to basically create this personhood status for embryos. And then the legislature, yes, they came in and they did a little band-aid, and they said, hey, let's just make this band-aid for a minute, because they were worried about what the constituents would say. They were worried about, they wanted to rubber stamp the agenda too. So, the ruling as it is still stands. and the underlying like legal reasoning behind the ruling is unresolved. And without permanent legislation, I think we're looking at the protection of IVF and family planning. It's very uncertain. You know, future courts could strike down that temporary statute as unconstitutional like immediately, and we would lose access as soon as it happens. And you don't know until maybe the news channels pick up on it. Most people don't even know that that same case that got rid of IVF had a motion to declare that law unconstitutional until the end of January 2025. So just 9 months ago, we could have lost IVF again. So
Um,
I'm a feeling like, you know, we really need our legislature to step up because we deserve certainty and protection when it comes to growing families. We don't need shifting political solutions trying to protect, you know, a possibility of getting voted in again or making somebody higher up happy with us.
that's right. And I don't want to get really political on here because, of the judicial code of ethics.
Yeah.
But I will say the legislature, trying to find a solution to problems is not ever good in this state, really, because it sometimes
No.
creates more problems. Tell us about the dangers of impact litigation.
Whew. So, you know, impact litigation, it's a double-edged sword, to be honest with you. It's one of those situations where, you know, we can really address like real world injustices and get toward, you saw it with the civil rights. We got toward a place where we were good. We were really fixing some issues that we had in the past. However, what we're seeing lately is these groups who are have these political agendas that they're sending in through the courts, and they're bringing these things that have already been litigated. So like you saw with Roe v. Wade being overturned with the Dobbs decision, what we're seeing right now with the Voting Rights Act, things that have been litigated in the past, you're seeing these groups who are coming to reshape policy and just kind of undermining public trust in the judiciary. So that really takes the decision making away from the people who have voted to elect the representatives. It takes, you know, their votes and and their decision making away from them and their elected representatives and puts it in the court. So it kind of makes where instead of using our legislature to make laws, we're using our judiciary. And even in some of the legislators are making these laws that are unconstitutional and then bringing them over and over again. And the courts, you know, depending on which side the court is on at that point in time, they may or may not agree. Like they may say, okay, like they're doing with the Voting Rights Act right now. Times are changing. We think it has, you know, I think it was Justice Roberts said he believes that there's an expiration on the Voting Rights Act and that we've reached it. And that's just not necessarily like a true decision. I mean, there was nothing in the Voting Rights Act that says that. So I think we're having some major issues with impact litigation because right now we do have, it's almost like lobbyists, if you will, or special specific interest groups who are making these laws and talking to the legislature. And the legislature may or may not even know that it's unconstitutional. But like even with like the First Amendment that's going on right now with the Jail the Librarians bill, I mean, it was ruled in 1982 that you could not take books out of libraries that were harmful to children because of your own personal views, but yet they're still doing it. And if you change the courts, those decisions may change. So I think that's, you know, that's impact litigation in a nutshell. So sometimes it can be good, but right now it's not going in the favor of civil rights. It's not going in the direction of protecting our rights and protecting our First Amendment access.
And also that you get times when impact litigation can bend the other way. You can have a noble intent and get the wrong ruling that sets up decades of despair. I think back to Plessy. Homer Plessy, that whole decision was a staged event.
Mm-hmm.
They, and the hope of the railroad company was to get it overturned so they didn't have to have all these extra train cars. Now, granted, they didn't have a noble purpose either. They, would treat black customers horribly, regardless. But it led to Jim Crow. And in the dissent, the justice who wrote the dissent said he knew what was going to happen in the South. He predicted it to a T, and that's what happened.
Well,
What
and that's very true because if you think about the IVF decision, I don't think that those parents um really intended when they or those parents or those because they were parents of some of the embryos, but the couples that were suing, I don't think they intended for personhood status to come around. I even talked to the lawyer who handled one of those cases, and he told me I didn't we had no intention of creating personhood status. So like in that situation, there was an agenda, a political agenda that was being forced. Just like in also oh, there was another one that I was thinking of that was coming forward, and I was like, well, they didn't think about that either. But yeah, you're right. It's just sometimes you just don't know, and it also it just depends on some agendas and what's going to happen there.
that is true. Like Obergefell could be overturned very soon because of some impact litigation out of Kentucky.
Yes. Oh, the one that I was thinking about. There was one that was a woman who had sued. I can't remember the exact case on this one because I hadn't looked at it in a minute, but there was a case where she didn't want to handle a same-sex couple's wedding website. And so the Supreme Court ruled, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, that she didn't have, because it violated her First Amendment right to religion, she didn't have to handle that. Well, I am seeing in some of my fertility cases in Huntsville, there's a fertility clinic that only handles specific, what he calls the traditional American family cases or patients. And so he denies people who are single mothers or people who are same sex couples from seeking access to fertility treatment. It's the only clinic that's open in Huntsville besides a satellite clinic from one of our Birmingham clinics.
Oh,
And he has that right because of that case.
wow. Um, what do you believe the biggest issue facing the Alabama judicial system is currently?
Oh, I just was writing an article on this because I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's access to justice. So I think there are way too many people who are priced out of our judicial system. You know, the thing is there are so many filing fees and admin fees that people have to pay, and those are just huge barriers to a lot of people in this economy. And then also, looking at your judges changing from county to county, the laws are not applied consistently. So I really feel like at this point, if we just balance fairness and accountability and accessibility, then people will start to believe in our justice system again. And I think that, we're seeing for in the news, we're seeing all these things about activist judges and things like that. And I think that that's also causing some issues with the judicial system. I don't think that people need to listen to that. We need to look at what the law is and, how we are applying it. And we also need to know real people, like how our decisions impact real people. And I think that that's really important, especially, with what I'm doing right now is trying to make sure that, I'm following the law, but I'm also making sure that there are common sense realities that are taken into account and common sense solutions taken into account. And sometimes we lose sight of that when you're not out there with the real people and you're not seeing the impact of your decisions, you may not know.
That is that is true. There is a definite brick wall of access to justice, access to adequate counsel across this state. I would venture to guess the vast majority of people going into the Alabama court system are having to use public defenders
Hmm.
because the bar to entry is so high. And there are people that, are being told by these overworked public defenders to just plead guilty to get a, lesser sentence. And that criminal record follows them for the rest of their life and is an anchor around their upward mobility in the future.
You're
So many
right.
paths are cut off.
Yep.
In Alabama, judicial elections are explicitly partisan. Do you believe that is a good practice, or could the state benefit from adopting a nonpartisan system for electing judges?
Oh, I'll get on my soapbox for this one because let me tell you, you know, the judicial system, there's a scale of justice for a reason. And Lady Justice is blind for a reason. I believe, if we were to keep, well, first of all, I believe it needs to be nonpartisan. But that may be too far out there. But let me just say right now, it needs to be nonpartisan. I do believe that the state bar should take applications or take and do interviews, maybe local judicial commissions instead of doing it as a voting process. I find that a lot of times, um, you really need to know the lawyers and know their jobs to understand, what they've done and if they would be right for that position. Right now, it's all depending on whether you have an R or a D based on your name. And I just think that we need to talk to people, get to know these candidates, and I think that the state bar would be best. But if we can't do that, if we just can't have the state bar be the one that decides this, then maybe what we should do is, at least on the top level, and maybe the Court of Civil Appeals, Criminal Appeals, and Supreme Court, is I think that we should make it truly balanced, because you need people from all areas of life. And you know, right now, Alabama in all the top positions is one party. So we're not seeing different areas. We're not seeing varying decisions. And just the other day, one of the Supreme Court justices was talking, and he said, "Oh, we've been talking about these accountability courts and those bleeding heart liberal courts. We thought they would never work, but we're seeing them work." And I was like, yes, sometimes, I don't know, maybe you need an outsider's perspective. Maybe if we had both sides on the bench, it would be, balanced. So that's what I really truly believe is, some states say that you can't have a supermajority of either party. Genius, in my opinion. So if the bar is not going to make the choice, if we're not going to have our licensing authority say who should be a judge and who shouldn't, then we should at least make it so that we don't have it unbalanced. It's one of those
I
things where
agree.
I get on my soapbox and I get really angry about it, but that's those are my two ideas. That's how we could fix the whole system.
And another thing we could look at possibly electing or having a requirement that there has to be a justice from each congressional district in the
Yes.
state. That would give regional variety because I don't know if any member of the court currently is from the Black Belt. I don't know if any member of the court is from, my corner of a state up here in the northeast part of the state, which is experiencing a huge population influx. And
Yeah.
both of those perspectives are needed on the court
I
because
agree with you. Yeah.
those areas are facing totally different concerns and they're both valid concerns. What is an uplifting moment from your legal career?
So, the first few years of my legal career, and even honestly for the first 10 years of my legal career, I could say that winning a custody case or winning a divorce case was an uplifting moment. But to be honest with you, there are dark moments associated with all of those. Somebody's still losing custody. Somebody was still, if there was an abuse situation, somebody still dealt with having an abuser. Somebody still dealt with, they're going against the other person they used to love for years and years and years. So while those moments could still be like great wins in my past when I did, trials every other day and while I was in the courtroom, they felt good at the moment. But looking back on it, I could tell they still hurt my heart a little bit. So honestly, the most uplifting moments have been working on my fertility cases, being able to use my pain that I had in the past of not being a mom and then finally becoming a mom. Like those cases really show that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, they're about people helping people. So they're just amazing.
You know, even I've never been married, never even been close to a marriage, but I could imagine that a divorce case, even though you're in a battle for custody and, the spark has gone out of that marriage, at the end of the day, you were still married to that person and have a child with that person. And at some point, there has to be still some feeling towards them in some way. And and those divorce cases get so nasty and so personal sometimes that I can imagine that is a very hard thing to do as an attorney.
Yes, it really is.
Do you think that most voters understand how broken the Alabama Department of Corrections is?
Whew. I think people are starting to understand the depth of how bad it is. You know, with the whole national coverage, with the documentaries, with the people who are actually reaching out on their social media, showing how dark it is and how difficult it is to be in prison. I believe that those are showing people a tiny sliver of how bad it is. I think I'm kind of hopeful that having this increased awareness will lead to some bipartisan solutions. I'm hoping that we can be tough on crime while also ensuring that our correctional system is, is protecting public safety and respecting human dignity and is addressing mental health and rehabilitation. But I think that we're going to have a real shakeup because of what's come to light.
You know, that I've not watched the Alabama Solutions, but I've seen the clips on social media. And I will never forget the first time that I saw a live stream from inside an Alabama prison. I was on Facebook. This is like 2016, around the time Facebook Live first debuted. And it was a fight inside an Alabama state prison. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like an actual, like right now happening. And it was brutal. And I'm like, how is this happening? And you see the stories about the deaths inside the state correctional facility. The Trump Justice Department, in its first term, sued the state of Alabama over the conditions of the state prisons. And that litigation is still moving through the court. I believe it
Yeah,
was 7 years ago that that case was filed.
it's still going on and nothing has really been done.
And
Yeah. I think there's also a huge problem with dehumanizing people right now. So you're seeing it a lot with immigration issues. Like, oh, if they were illegal, then this wouldn't happen to them. And it's like, oh, if they weren't criminals, then this wouldn't happen to them. They're taking away these people's human ability, like your human ability to have compassion on other people because you're like, well, they deserve it in some way. So I think that that's a huge issue, especially with what's happening in the media right now.
you know, this gets back to my biggest thing, and I don't want people to not think that I did not support this man with my comment. But the biggest mistake Joe Biden made as president was not appointing Doug Jones Attorney General, because
Oh, I agree.
I think
I
Doug
agree.
Jones could have got something done about that case and forced Alabama to move because he would have understood the depth of the problem.
Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry. I have the courthouse calling me and there may be an emergency. Can you give me just 1 second?
Yes, we will
Okay.
pause.
Sorry.
Okay, we had a slight interruption there. Ashley had an emergency she had to tend to, and we were talking about the correction system. But the next question I have for her is this: what are voters telling you is the biggest concern they have on the campaign trail?
Oh, I tell you what, it's the economy. We are looking at everybody, especially right now, with the government shutdown. I was in Madison County over the weekend, which is where I'm from originally, and the government shutdown is hitting people hard. What I do for a living is, like I said, I hear child abuse and neglect cases, and those families are going to be hit the hardest when those SNAP benefits go away. So this is hitting everybody. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. We are seeing people struggling, and that impacts their everyday lives, whether it's, their ability to seek justice, to, go after someone. When I had a friend of mine who got, punched in the face, and he's like, I'm spending $7,000 dealing with that, and I can't afford to deal with everything else going on in my life because somebody did this. So he can't go and sue them because he can't afford to hire a lawyer for that. So these fair courts and access to justice plays a really big role in situations where we're looking at financial security, and we can't if people can't afford to get to the courts and they can't afford to pay their bills and their kids aren't eating, then we're looking at a situation where there's neglect. So, we got neglect happening, and those people can't afford to go and to get their life back on track. Then they don't have a chance of getting their kids back. Or if, they're unable to pay their bills and they're losing their home and they're going to end up homeless, these are huge problems that also impact people's ability to take care of their children. And we need to make sure that we're taking care of children no matter what. So, it's really hard seeing all these people struggling because of the economy, and seeing our legislators going on vacations. That's very difficult.
Another thing also that I'm seeing is you see people on the internet posting pictures of their open enrollment for, healthcare is going up tremendously. I really fear what happens when Obamacare opens in a couple weeks for those who have to go on the marketplace. Is the system even going to work? Are they even going to allow open enrollment in the marketplace? Are they going to claim that because the government shut down, something of that nature? I also fear they're probably going to do something with air traffic around
Yes.
Thanksgiving. I think they may furlough um, air traffic control and TSA agents and say, "Oh well, there's no air traffic control or TSA agents at the airport, so air travel's shut down the week of Thanksgiving."
I mean, I see it now. I'm seeing people who are trying to make it to their jobs in other cities and they can't make it to, appointments or jobs. I have people in my court system who can't make it to court because they're having flights canceled because there's no air traffic controllers. So, I mean, we are seeing huge impacts on what's happening in the economy everywhere. And so, of course, it's going to impact the courts as well. And let me tell you, when we have a downturn in the economy, we have major issues with family law cases because people get mean, people get desperate. A lot of things start happening that really impact the family unit, in addition to all other, the when you're looking at things like, just paying your bills in general. So yeah, this is going to be, it's hard right now for people.
Um, Ashley, where can people get more information about your campaign?
So we are, like a true millennial, I'm all over social media. So I have a TikTok account. So it's just Ashleigh Dunham. So it's Ashleigh is how you spell my name. Dunham, Dunham. My website is ashleyforalabama.com. And then my other socials. So if you look on Instagram, it's Ashleigh Dunham again. So ASHLEIGHDUNHAM. And then the Facebook is just going to be Ashleigh Dunham for Supreme Court Associate Justice.
Um, Thank you for coming on. I've heard Ashley speak twice. I heard her speak to a large group, and then heard her speak to another group, and we did not have such a great turnout for it. But in both settings, she was a tremendous speaker and really brought her story of why she's running for the Supreme Court to voters and had a really good reception at both events. And I think Ashley is going to have a really successful campaign. And I hope that in January of 2027, Ashley becomes the newest justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. And we say Justice Dunham. So, Ashley, thank you for coming on today and all the best to you in your race.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.